The leather wallet lay forgotten on the marble floor of the executive suite, its contents scattered like broken promises. Carmen Rodriguez had cleaned thousands of offices in her 15 years at Sterling Financial Tower, but she had never seen anything quite like this. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the 42nd floor, casting long shadows across the mahogany desk, where the most powerful man in the building made decisions that affected thousands of lives. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Carmen pressed her cleaning cart against the wall and approached the scattered items carefully. Credit cards, business cards, and photographs were spread across the pristine floor like pieces of a puzzle waiting to be solved. Her weathered hands, marked by years of honest work, trembled slightly as she knelt down. She recognized the name on the driver's license immediately: Jonathan Sterling, the enigmatic CEO who commanded the entire building but remained a mystery to everyone who worked beneath him. The photograph that caught her attention made her breath catch in her throat. A young boy, maybe 8 years old, smiled back at her from a faded image. The child's eyes held the same intense blue as the man she had glimpsed only in passing through these halls. But there was something else in the picture that made her heart ache. The boy was in a hospital bed, connected to tubes and machines, his brave smile somehow making the scene even more heartbreaking. Carmen had seen pain before. She understood loss in ways that money could never teach. Her own son, Miguel, had fought a similar battle when he was 12, and the memory of those sterile hospital rooms came flooding back. She gathered the scattered contents with the reverence of someone who knew that these weren't just objects, but pieces of a story that someone was desperately trying to keep private. The next morning, Carmen arrived at the Sterling Financial Tower as she had every day for the past decade and a half. The security guard nodded his usual greeting, and she made her way through the employee entrance to collect her supplies. The 42nd floor was always her first stop, the executive level where silence reigned supreme, and every surface gleamed under her careful attention. She had placed the wallet in a manila envelope the night before, writing, quote, "Found in executive suite," in her careful handwriting. The plan was simple: leave it with security and let them handle the return. But as she approached the reception desk outside Jonathan Sterling's office, something made her pause. The secretary's desk was empty. A small placard indicated that Mrs. Henderson was out for the week, attending to a family emergency. Carmen stood there for a moment, weighing her options. She could leave the envelope on the desk, but something about the personal nature of its contents made her uncomfortable with that choice. Instead, she found herself walking toward the CEO's office door. She had cleaned this space countless times, but always when it was empty, always in the early morning hours before the building came alive with the rush of business. Now, at 9 in the morning, she could hear the low murmur of voices from within. Carmen knocked softly, her heart racing with an unfamiliar nervousness. She had worked in this building for years, without ever speaking directly to the man whose empire surrounded her daily life. "Come in," came the response from within. Jonathan Sterling sat behind his desk, ending a phone call as she entered. He was younger than she had expected, maybe 45, with premature silver threading through his dark hair. His blue eyes, the same ones she had seen in the hospital photograph, held a weariness that seemed at odds with his position of power. "I'm sorry to interrupt, Mr. Sterling," Carmen began, her voice steady despite her nerves. "I found this in your office yesterday evening." She placed the envelope on his desk with careful precision. Jonathan looked up at her with genuine surprise. Most people in the building avoided direct contact with him, preferring to communicate through assistants and intermediaries. He opened the envelope and his expression shifted, a vulnerability flickering across his features as he saw his wallet returned intact. "Thank you," he said quietly, checking the contents. Everything was there, including the photograph that Carmen knew meant more to him than all the credit cards combined. "I didn't even realize I had dropped it." Carmen nodded and turned to leave, but something in his voice made her pause. "Mr. Sterling, if you don't mind me saying, that's a beautiful picture of your son." The silence that followed stretched between them like a bridge neither was sure they should cross. Jonathan's hand moved instinctively to the photograph, and Carmen saw something break behind his carefully constructed professional mask. "He was," Jonathan said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "He was beautiful." The past tense hung in the air between them, heavy with implications that Carmen understood all too well. She had heard rumors among the staff about their CEO's personal tragedy, whispered conversations that stopped when supervisors passed by. Now, standing in this moment of raw honesty, she felt the weight of shared understanding. "I'm sorry," Carmen said simply. "I lost someone too. It changes everything." Jonathan looked at her then, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time seeing past the uniform to the person beneath. "What was their name?" "Isabella," Carmen replied. "My daughter. She was 16. The conversation that followed was brief but profound. Two strangers connected by the universal language of loss, finding in each other an unexpected understanding. When Carmen finally left his office, something had shifted in the sterile corporate atmosphere of the 42nd floor. Over the following weeks, their interactions remained minimal but meaningful. Jonathan would nod when he passed her in the hallway, a gesture that seemed insignificant to observers but felt like recognition to Carmen. She began to notice things about him that others missed. The way his shoulders sagged when he thought no one was watching, the exhaustion in his eyes during late evening phone calls she could hear through his office door. One Thursday evening, as Carmen finished cleaning the conference room adjacent to his office, she heard the unmistakable sound of someone trying not to cry. The building was nearly empty, most employees having left hours earlier. She hesitated outside his door, her cleaning supplies forgotten as she listened to the quiet sounds of grief that he thought no one could hear. The next morning she left a simple note on his desk, alongside his usual fresh coffee that the morning service provided. "Some days are harder than others. That's okay." She didn't sign it, but somehow she knew he would understand who it was from. Jonathan found himself looking forward to these small interactions in ways that surprised him. Carmen's presence brought a sense of calm to his chaotic world, a reminder that kindness still existed, even in the cold corporate environment he had built around himself. He began to notice the way she moved through the building with quiet dignity, the respect she showed to every surface she cleaned, the gentle manner in which she treated the space that others took for granted. One evening, working late again in his office, Jonathan found himself walking to the window that overlooked the city. The light stretched out before him like a constellation of other people's lives, other people's stories. He thought about the photograph in his wallet, about the conversation with Carmen, about the note she had left him. Marcus had been gone for 3 years now, and Jonathan had thrown himself into work with the intensity of someone trying to outrun his own shadow. The company had thrived under his leadership, but success felt hollow when there was no one to share it with. His marriage hadn't survived the loss of their child, another casualty of grief that he... Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Carried like a stone in his chest. Carmen's simple acknowledgement of his pain had done something that years of therapy and countless sympathy cards hadn't managed. It had reminded him that he wasn't alone in his suffering, that grief was a country with many citizens, and that sometimes the most healing thing was simply being seen. The following Monday brought news that would change everything for both of them. Carmen arrived at work to find the building buzzing with unusual energy. Huddles of employees whispered in corners, and the normal rhythm of corporate life seemed disrupted by an undercurrent of anxiety. In the staff break room, Carmen learned the source of the commotion. Sterling Financial was being investigated for financial irregularities. Federal agents had been in and out of the building over the weekend, and rumors suggested that someone had been embezzling funds for years. The implications were staggering, not just for the company's reputation but for the jobs of everyone who worked there. Carmen felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. She had seen economic uncertainty before, had lived through layoffs and company closures that left families struggling to survive. The thought of losing her job, especially at her age, filled her with a familiar dread. But her concern wasn't just personal. She found herself thinking about Jonathan, about the additional burden this crisis would place on someone already carrying so much weight. She had seen enough in her years of cleaning offices to know that when companies faced scandals, it was often the person at the top who bore the brunt of the blame, regardless of their actual culpability. That evening, as she cleaned the executive floor, the building felt different. The usual confidence that permeated these halls had been replaced by an atmosphere of uncertainty. Jonathan's office light was on later than usual, and through the glass partition, she could see him on multiple phone calls, his posture tense with stress. Carmen finished her rounds and was preparing to leave when she heard raised voices from the direction of the CEO's office. She paused, not wanting to eavesdrop but concerned by the angry tone of the conversation. Through the partially open door, she could see Jonathan facing three men in expensive suits, their body language aggressive and confrontational. "This is your mess, Sterling," one of them was saying. "We trusted you with our investments, and now the FBI is crawling all over our books." "I'm handling it," Jonathan replied, his voice strained but controlled. "The investigation will clear the company. We just need to stay calm and let the process run its course." "Stay calm?" Another man laughed bitterly. "Do you have any idea what this is costing us, what it's costing our reputation?" Carmen recognized these men as members of the board of directors, people whose names appeared on the company literature but whom she rarely saw in person. Their presence here, at this hour, with this level of hostility, suggested that Jonathan's troubles were deeper than the general staff realized. "I want your resignation on my desk by Friday," the first man continued. "We're bringing in outside management to clean up this disaster." The words hit Carmen like a physical blow. She had witnessed enough corporate politics to understand what was happening. Jonathan was being made a scapegoat, forced to take responsibility for problems that might not even be of his making. The injustice of it, especially knowing the personal struggles he was already facing, ignited something protective in her chest. After the board members left, Carmen found herself standing outside Jonathan's office door once again. This time, she didn't hesitate to knock. "Mr. Sterling? It's Carmen from housekeeping. I wanted to make sure you were all right." When he opened the door, she could see the toll the evening had taken on him. His usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, his tie loosened, his eyes red with exhaustion and stress. "I'm fine," he said automatically, then seemed to realize the futility of the lie. "Actually, no, I'm not fine at all." Carmen stepped into his office without being invited, a breach of protocol that would have been unthinkable weeks earlier. "I heard some of what they said. I'm sorry." Jonathan sank into his chair, the weight of the day finally overwhelming his composure. 3 years I've been building this company back up after Marcus died. 3 years of 18-hour days, of making every decision with his memory driving me forward. And now they want to throw it all away because someone in accounting decided to help themselves to company funds. The revelation that the embezzlement had been discovered in the accounting department was news to Carmen, but she kept her focus on the man in front of her, rather than the corporate intrigue. "Sometimes doing the right thing costs us everything," she said quietly, "but it doesn't make it wrong." Jonathan looked at her with something approaching wonder. "How do you do that?" "Do what?" "Find exactly the right thing to say." "I've had lawyers and consultants and crisis management experts in here all week, and none of them have managed to make me feel like there might be a way through this." Carmen sat down in the chair across from his desk, a gesture that would have seemed presumptuous from anyone else but felt natural coming from her. Maybe because they're trying to fix the problem instead of seeing the person. They talked for nearly an hour that night, a conversation that wandered from corporate crisis to personal loss, from the weight of responsibility to the simple human need for connection. Jonathan found himself sharing details about his son's illness that he had never spoken about publicly, while Carmen told him about the car accident that had taken Isabella and how she had rebuilt her life one day at a time afterward. When Carmen finally left that evening, both of them carried something they hadn't had before, the knowledge that they weren't facing their struggles alone. The investigation intensified over the following days. Federal agents conducted interviews throughout the building, and the media picked up the story with the relentless appetite that corporate scandals always generated. Jonathan's name appeared in headlines alongside terms like, quote, "financial misconduct," and, quote, "corporate malfeasance." Even though the actual charges were still being determined, Carmen watched the coverage with growing anger. She had seen enough of Jonathan Sterling to know that whatever was happening in his company, it wasn't happening with his knowledge or consent. The man who returned lost wallets intact, who grieved silently for his lost child, who treated a housekeeping staff member with genuine respect, wasn't the type of person who would steal from his own company. But more than that, she had begun to care about what happened to him. Their evening conversations had become a regular occurrence, moments of genuine human connection in a building that had become a war zone of accusations and investigations. She had watched him fight not just for his company but for the jobs of every person who worked there, making personal sacrifices to keep the business running, even as his own reputation crumbled. It was during one of these conversations that Carmen learned the full scope of what Jonathan was facing. The embezzlement scheme had been sophisticated, running for nearly 5 years and involving multiple shell companies and falsified records. The person responsible had been clever enough to make it appear that the funds were being diverted for legitimate business expenses, all requiring CEO approval. "They're saying I signed off on all of it," Jonathan explained, his voice hollow with exhaustion. "Every fraudulent transaction has my electronic signature on it." "But you didn't know," Carmen said. "It wasn't a question." "No, I didn't know. But proving that is another matter entirely. My assistant handled most of the routine approvals. And she—" He trailed off, the implications hanging between them. Carmen felt pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. Mrs. Henderson, the secretary who had been out for a family emergency during the week when everything started unraveling, the same Mrs. Henderson who would have had access to Jonathan's electronic signature, who would have known which transactions could be buried in the routine paperwork that crossed his desk daily. "Have they talked to Mrs. Henderson?" Carmen asked carefully. Jonathan's expression darkened. "She's been unreachable since the investigation started. Her family emergency turned into an extended leave of absence, and the contact information she left has turned out to be disconnected numbers." The betrayal was written across his face, the realization that someone he had trusted for years had not only stolen from him, but had constructed an elaborate framework to ensure that he would take the blame. Carmen felt her heart break for him, understanding now the full weight of what he was carrying. That night, after Jonathan had finally gone home, Carmen found herself doing something she had never done before in her 15 years at Sterling Financial. She stayed after her shift ended and made her way to Mrs. Henderson's desk. The desk had been sealed by the investigators, but Carmen wasn't interested in the official files. She was thinking about the small personal items that people kept in their workspace, the details that might not seem important to federal agents but could tell a different story to someone who understood the rhythms of office life. In the small trash can beside the desk, Carmen found what she was looking for. A receipt from a travel agency, crumpled and overlooked, dated just days before the investigation began. The destination was a non-extradition country, and the ticket was one way. Carmen photographed the receipt with her phone and replaced it exactly where she had found it. She wasn't sure what she could do with the information, but she knew it was important. Mrs. Henderson hadn't left for a family emergency. She had fled before the investigation could reach her, leaving Jonathan to face the consequences of her crimes. The next morning brought another devastating blow. The board of directors called an emergency meeting and announced that they were suspending Jonathan pending the completion of the investigation. The decision was presented as a protective measure for the company, but everyone understood what it really meant. Jonathan Sterling, the man who had built Sterling Financial into one of the most successful investment firms in the city, was being forced out of his own company. Carmen watched from the lobby as Jonathan cleaned out his office, his movements mechanical and defeated. The sight of him packing his personal items into cardboard boxes, including the photograph of Marcus that she knew meant everything to him, filled her with a rage that surprised her with its intensity. She had spent her entire adult life accepting that powerful people made decisions that affected her life without her input. She had been laid off, transferred, and restructured more times than she could count, always accepting these changes as inevitable forces beyond her control. But watching Jonathan being destroyed by lies and betrayal was different. This time, she knew the truth, and this time, she had evidence. That evening, Carmen did something that would have been unthinkable just weeks earlier. She called the number on the business card that the lead FBI investigator had left at the security desk, requesting interviews with anyone who had information about the financial irregularities. Agent Sarah Martinez met with Carmen in a small conference room in the federal building downtown. Carmen had dressed in her best clothes and practiced what she wanted to say, but when the moment came, she spoke from her heart rather than from her prepared notes. "I know you probably get a lot of people trying to defend their bosses," Carmen began, "but I need you to know that Jonathan Sterling isn't guilty of what you think he is." Agent Martinez listened patiently as Carmen explained what she had observed over the past weeks, the evidence she had found, and her certainty that Mrs. Henderson was the real culprit. To her credit, the agent took notes and asked detailed questions. treating Carmen's testimony with the same seriousness she would have given to a corporate executive. "This receipt you found," Agent Martinez said, examining the photograph Carmen had taken. "You're certain it was in Mrs. Henderson's personal trash?" "Yes, ma'am. I empty that trash can every day." It wasn't there the day before the investigation started, but it was there the day after she called in with her family emergency. The meeting lasted for over an hour, and by the end, Carmen felt cautiously hopeful that she had planted seeds of doubt about the case against Jonathan. Agent Martinez promised to follow up on the travel agency receipt and to look more carefully at Mrs. Henderson's role in the financial transactions. But even as Carmen felt hopeful about the investigation, she worried about Jonathan himself. She had heard from other employees that he had been spending most of his time at home, cut off from the company he had devoted his life to building. The isolation, combined with the public humiliation and the weight of the accusations, had to be taking a terrible toll. Carmen found herself thinking about him constantly, wondering if he was eating properly, if he was sleeping, if he had anyone to talk to about what he was going through. The connection they had built over evening conversations in his office had become one of the most important relationships in her life, and the thought of him suffering alone was unbearable. On Saturday morning, Carmen did something that crossed every boundary between employer and employee, between executive and cleaning staff, between the different worlds they inhabited. She drove to Jonathan's house. The address was listed in the employee directory, and Carmen was surprised to find that it wasn't the mansion she had expected. Instead, Jonathan lived in a modest two-story home in a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place where families raised children and planted gardens. The yard was well-maintained but not ostentatious, and the house itself had the comfortable lived-in feeling of a place that was a home rather than a showpiece. Carmen sat in her car for nearly 10 minutes before working up the courage to ring the doorbell. When Jonathan answered, his surprise was evident, but so was something that looked like relief. "Carmen, what are you doing here?" "I wanted to make sure you were okay," she said simply. "And I have something to tell you." Jonathan invited her in, and Carmen found herself in a living room that felt warm and personal in ways that his corporate office never could. Family photographs lined the mantelpiece, most of them featuring the same boy from the wallet picture at various stages of his young life. There were also pictures of Jonathan with a woman who must have been his ex-wife, both of them looking younger and happier than Carmen could imagine him being now. Over coffee at his kitchen table, Carmen told Jonathan about her meeting with the FBI agent and about the receipt she had found. She watched hope flicker in his eyes, followed immediately by caution. "Even if they believe you," he said, "even if they find Mrs. Henderson and charge her with the embezzlement, the damage to my reputation might be irreversible. The board has already made it clear that they want me gone." "Then maybe it's time to stop fighting for people who don't deserve you," Carmen said. "Maybe it's time to fight for something that does." Jonathan looked at her with curiosity. "What do you mean?" Carmen had been thinking about this conversation for days, and now that the moment had come, she spoke with a conviction that surprised them both. "You could start your own company. Take the clients who trust you, the employees who believe in you, and build something new. Something that belongs to you, instead of to a board of directors who throw you away the moment things get difficult." The idea hung between them like a bridge to a future that neither had imagined possible. Jonathan's eyes lit up with something Carmen hadn't seen since before the investigation began: genuine excitement. "It would be risky," he said, but she could hear the wheels turning in his mind. "Starting over at this stage of my career with this scandal hanging over me." "Everything worth doing is risky," Carmen replied, "but you're not starting over. You're taking everything you've learned and building something better." They spent the rest of the afternoon talking about the practical aspects of starting a new investment firm. Jonathan's knowledge of the industry and his existing client relationships would provide the foundation, while Carmen's perspective as someone who understood the value of honest work and genuine relationships offered insights that surprised him with their wisdom. As the sun began to set, Jonathan realized that this was the first day since the investigation began that he had felt hope instead of despair. Carmen's faith in him, her practical support, and her simple presence had reminded him that his identity wasn't defined by the accusations against him or by the betrayal of people he had trusted. "I have a confession," Jonathan said as Carmen prepared to leave. "These conversations we've been having, these evenings in my office, they've become the best part of my days. Not just because of the support you've given me, but because of who you are. Your strength, your kindness, your ability to see what's important when everything else seems to be falling apart. Carmen felt her cheeks warm with something she hadn't experienced in years. "Mr. Sterling." "Jonathan," he corrected gently. "After everything we've been through, I think we can use first names." "Jonathan," she continued, his name feeling natural on her lips. "You've been through more than anyone should have to handle. It would be easy to become bitter or to give up. But you haven't. You've kept fighting, not just for yourself but for everyone who works for you. That takes a special kind of courage." The moment stretched between them, filled with words that neither was quite ready to say, but both understood. The connection that had begun with a returned wallet had grown into something deeper, something that transcended the professional boundaries that had initially defined their relationship. Over the following weeks, as the FBI investigation continued and the media attention gradually shifted to other stories, Jonathan began laying the groundwork for his new company. Several of his most trusted employees expressed interest in joining him, bringing both their expertise and their client relationships to the new venture. Carmen found herself playing an increasingly important role in these plans, not as an employee, but as a trusted advisor whose judgment Jonathan had come to value above almost anyone else's. Her insights into people and situations, honed by years of observing human nature from the periphery, proved invaluable as they built their team and developed their business strategy. The vindication, when it came, was swift and decisive. Agent Martinez's investigation had traced Mrs. Henderson to a luxury resort in Costa Rica, where she was arrested attempting to access funds from one of the shell companies she had created. Her confession detailed a complex scheme that had taken years to develop and had indeed used Jonathan's electronic signature without his knowledge or consent. The news of Mrs. Henderson's arrest made the front page of the business section, and by afternoon, Jonathan's phone was ringing with calls from former clients, board members, and business associates who wanted to apologize for their hasty judgments. The vindication felt good, but it also felt less important than it would have weeks earlier. Jonathan's focus had shifted from clearing his name to building something new, something that reflected his values rather than the expectations of people who had been so quick to abandon him. Sterling & Associates, the company he had founded with Carmen's encouragement and several trusted colleagues, was already beginning to take shape. The office space they had leased was smaller than Jonathan's former corporate headquarters, but it felt more alive, more personal. Carmen had helped choose the location, a converted warehouse in a neighborhood that was experiencing revitalization, and her influence was evident in the warm, welcoming atmosphere they had created. On the day they received their business license, Jonathan found Carmen in the break room of their new office, arranging fresh flowers in a vase she had brought from home. The sight of her there, making their workspace beautiful in the same careful way she had always approached her work, filled him with a contentment he hadn't felt in years. "There's something I need to tell you," he said, and Carmen looked up with the slight concern that had become habitual whenever serious conversations began. "The success of this company, everything we've built here, it wouldn't have been possible without you. Not just your practical help or your insights about people and business, but your faith in me when I had stopped having faith in myself." Carmen set down the flowers and gave him her full attention, sensing that something important was about to be said. "But more than that," Jonathan continued, "these past months have shown me that the best parts of my life have been the moments we've spent together. The conversations, the shared understanding, the way you see straight through to what matters most. I've fallen in love with you, Carmen, and I hope that doesn't complicate everything we've built here." The silence that followed stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Carmen had known this moment was coming, had felt the shift in their relationship from professional to personal, to something deeper and more meaningful than either of them had expected. "It doesn't complicate anything," she said finally, her voice soft but certain. "Because I've fallen in love with you too." The kiss that followed was gentle and tentative, the first physical expression of feelings that had been growing for months. When they separated, both of them were smiling with the quiet joy of people who had found something unexpected and precious. 6 months later, Sterling & Associates had grown from a startup dream to a thriving investment firm with a growing client base and a reputation for ethical practices and personal attention. The success had vindicated Jonathan's decision to start over, but more importantly, it had proven that sometimes losing everything you thought you wanted was the first step toward finding everything you actually needed. Carmen had transitioned from cleaning offices to managing the day-to-day operations of the company, her natural organizational skills, and her genuine care for people making her invaluable in the new role. The other employees, many of whom had followed Jonathan from Sterling Financial, had initially been surprised by her rapid rise in responsibility, but her competence and her obvious importance to Jonathan had quickly won their respect. The wedding was small and intimate, held in the garden behind Jonathan's house with only their closest friends and family in attendance. Carmen's son Miguel, now in college, walked her down the aisle, while Jonathan's brother served as best man. The ceremony was officiated by the pastor from Carmen's church, a man who had helped her through the darkest period of her life and who understood the significance of the joy she had found. As they exchanged vows, both Jonathan and Carmen spoke about the unexpected ways that love could emerge from loss, how two people carrying their own grief could find healing in each other's strength. The promises they made weren't just about the future they would build together, but about the past they would honor and the memories they would carry forward. In his vows, Jonathan spoke about the wallet that had brought them together, about how Carmen's simple act of honesty had opened a door to possibilities he never could have imagined. He talked about the way she had seen him, not as a powerful executive or a scandal-plagued businessman, but as a person worthy of care and understanding. Carmen's vows focused on the quiet strength she had discovered in Jonathan, the way he had faced betrayal and public humiliation without becoming bitter or cruel. She spoke about the privilege of witnessing his vulnerability and his courage, and about the hope he had given her that it was possible to love again after loss. The reception was held in the same garden, with string lights creating a warm glow as the sun set behind them. The guest list included employees from both Sterling Financial and Sterling & Associates, a testament to the loyalty and affection that Jonathan inspired in the people who worked with him. During the reception, Agent Martinez approached Carmen with a smile and a congratulations card. "I wanted you to know," she said, "that your testimony was crucial in building the case against Mrs. Henderson. Your willingness to speak up for the truth made all the difference." Carmen thanked her, but as she looked around at the celebration surrounding them, she realized that the truth she had spoken up for was about more than just financial crimes or corporate justice. It was about the truth of who Jonathan really was, about the kind of man who would build a company that treated its employees like family and its clients like friends. As the evening wound down and the last guest departed, Jonathan and Carmen found themselves alone in the garden, where they had just promised to spend their lives together. The house behind them glowed with warm light, and the future ahead of them seemed full of possibilities they were excited to explore together. "Do you ever think about how different things would be if you hadn't found that wallet?" Jonathan asked, pulling Carmen close as they swayed to music only they could hear. Carmen smiled, thinking about the chain of events that had brought them to this moment. "I think about it sometimes, but I also think that maybe we would have found each other anyway. Maybe the wallet was just the universe's way of making sure we didn't miss what was meant to be." Jonathan kissed her forehead, marveling at the wisdom and grace of the woman who had become his partner in every sense of the word. "I love the way you see the world," he said. "Like everything happens for a reason, even the difficult things." "Especially the difficult things," Carmen corrected. "If I hadn't lost Isabella, I might never have understood your grief well enough to reach out. If you hadn't lost Marcus, you might never have been vulnerable enough to let me in. Our losses brought us together, but our love will carry us forward." As they stood in their garden under a sky full of stars, surrounded by the life they had built together, both Jonathan and Carmen understood that they had found something rare and precious. They had found a love that was built on mutual respect and understanding, a partnership that honored their individual strengths while creating something stronger together than either could have achieved alone. The company they had built was thriving, providing meaningful work for people they cared about and ethical investment services for clients who had become friends. The home they shared was filled with laughter and warmth, a sanctuary where they could be completely themselves with each other. But perhaps most importantly, they had found a way to transform their individual grief into shared healing, to take the lessons learned from their losses and use them to create something beautiful and lasting. The love between them was a testament to the resilience of the human heart, to the possibility of new beginnings, even after the most devastating endings. Years later, when people asked Carmen about the moment that changed her life, she always returned to that morning when she found a wallet on the floor of an executive office. But it wasn't the wallet itself that mattered, she would explain. It was the choice she made to see the person behind the powerful position, to respond to pain with compassion rather than judgment, and to believe that everyone deserved kindness regardless of their circumstances. The wallet had been the beginning, but the real story was about what happened when two people chose to trust each other with their deepest vulnerabilities, when they decided that love was worth the risk of opening their hearts again after loss. It was a story about the power of seeing and being seen, about the courage required to rebuild after betrayal, and about the unexpected ways that the most meaningful connections could emerge from the simplest acts of human decency. Jonathan's new company continued to grow and prosper, becoming known not just for its financial success, but for its ethical practices and its commitment to treating both employees and clients with genuine care and respect. Carmen's role in the company evolved as well, as her natural leadership abilities and her deep understanding of what made people feel valued led to innovations in client services and employee relations that became models for other firms. But their greatest success was the life they built together, a partnership that honored both their individual journeys and their shared future. They traveled to places they had only dreamed of seeing, created traditions that reflected their blended family, and found joy in the everyday moments that make up a life well lived. The photograph of Marcus still sat on Jonathan's desk, but now it was accompanied by pictures of their wedding, of family gatherings, of moments of happiness that proved healing was possible without forgetting. Carmen kept a picture of Isabella in their home as well, and sometimes they would tell stories about their children to each other, keeping their memories alive while building new ones. Their love story became a source of hope for others who had experienced loss, proof that it was possible to find happiness again without betraying the memory of those who were gone. They learned to carry their grief not as a burden, but as a reminder of their capacity for love, and they used that knowledge to create a relationship that was deeper and more meaningful because of what they had survived. In the end, the wallet that brought them together became a symbol of more than just honesty or integrity. It represented the idea that sometimes the most important things in life come to us when we're not looking for them, that love can emerge from the most unlikely circumstances, and that the choice to do the right thing, even when no one is watching, can change the entire course of a life. Carmen and Jonathan's story was proof that redemption was possible, that people could rise above their circumstances, and that the most powerful force in the world was the simple decision to treat another person with kindness and respect. It was a reminder that in a world that often seemed divided by class and status and circumstance, the things that really mattered, love and loss and hope and healing, were universal experiences that connected all people in the deepest possible ways. As they built their new life together, Carmen and Jonathan never forgot the lessons that had brought them to each other. They understood that true wealth wasn't measured in financial success, but in the depth of human connection, in the courage to be vulnerable with another person, and in the choice to see beyond surface appearances to the heart beneath. Their story became a testament to the transformative power of love, built on foundation of mutual respect, shared values, and the understanding that everyone, regardless of their position in life, deserved to be seen, heard, and valued for who they truly were. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.